I'm going to talk a little bit about what our leaders' priorities are right now. And Rakeem talked about some things that we need to fix, and whether those things are getting the right amount of attention or whether all of the other things we care about are getting the right amount of attention and the right amount of resources. Um, and of course, a lot of those resources are not going where they should be and are going to the military instead. Um, I'm going to talk about this particular moment because violence for the sake of power is as old as time, but we are in a particularly terrible moment right now. So just in terms of context, we all know that Hurricane Helene just swept through several states in the South, hit really hard. It was a terrible, terrible event, 300 deaths so far and many people missing. Um, these are not just storm or flood deaths. These are climate change deaths. And that's something that, of course, we could work to prevent. Meanwhile, FEMA, the agency that's supposed to go down and help people, is facing a funding shortfall and Congress is declining to act. At the same time, there were multiple dams in North Carolina and Tennessee that were at the point of failure because of the Hurricane Helene flooding, and some of that could have been prevented and could be prevented in the future with adequate spending on infrastructure. So there's lots of things that we need money for. But a lot of where the money is going is to the wrong things, which is militarism. And Noah mentioned military and war, and that's where a lot of it goes. But when we talk about militarism, we really talk about militarism everywhere. It's the wars in other countries, it's militarism at our borders, it's the militarism in our own communities, and how our government funds and sponsors all of that. It's all part of one big system. So we also know that right now, in this moment, one of the big places in the world where terrible things are happening, in large part fed by our government, is in Gaza and the Middle East. It's been over a year of ruthless violence. The violence is spreading to Syria, Yemen, which the US bombed this week, Iran, and very, very consequently, Lebanon. So that is getting bigger and bigger. And just also this week, the US sent troops for the first time to Israel in this conflict to Israel to help run US missile defense systems. So the US involvement is getting deeper and deeper. Many of the weapons that have been used to commit war crimes and genocidal actions in Gaza have been US provided weapons. And we have documentation of many cases of that. So far, this has cost the United States and us $22 billion. And it's just going to get bigger. Before the Iraq War, the Bush administration officials estimated that that war would cost $50 billion. It ended up costing 60 times that much. It was over $3 trillion in the end. Overall, in the 20 years after 9/11, the US spent a total between the Iraq War, Afghanistan War, those wars spreading to Syria, Pakistan, other countries, and our militarism at home. We spent $21 trillion in those 20 years, more than $1 trillion every year for militarism. Meanwhile, the situation in the Middle East, all of those countries could likely simmer down and be brought to an end just with the simple solution of a ceasefire. Not that it's been simple to enact, but it is a simple solution. I also want to talk about our militarism here at home, and we're hearing a lot about mass deportation right now. And there are 13 million undocumented people in this country with families, communities, homes, livelihoods, and we're hearing about mass deportation. I won't even go into some of the other things that we're hearing. It's truly horrifying, racist and dehumanizing talk that I know you all are aware of. But what a lot of people in this country don't know who may support mass deportation, first of all, they probably don't know what that actually means. They don't know what it looks like. And they also don't know that the American Immigration Council recently estimated that it would cost about $1 trillion over 10 years to deport 13 million people. So in addition to the tremendous human suffering and crime against humanity that would be, it's also would be a huge cost to the country, and one that we obviously don't need to undertake. And just because I'm saying trillion this, trillion that, I want to give a little context on $1 trillion and what that is. It's roughly twice what the federal government spends every year on housing, education, public health, the environment, clean air and water, medical research, all combined. So it's quite a bit of money and could make a huge difference if it were reallocated to those things. And I'll just finish by saying that there are people who benefit from this, right? It's the power-hungry politicians, it's military contractors whose stock prices soared in the week after October 7th of last year, because they knew that this meant months, if not years, of ongoing weapons sales for them. I also want to point out, just to my final point, the same week that Hurricane Helene hit the South, FEMA had a $9 billion shortfall in funding for what they needed to do. That same week, the US sent $8.7 billion of weapons to Israel. It sent $8 billion worth of weapons to Ukraine, and it sent $500 million worth of weapons to Taiwan. So at the same time that we couldn't come up with $9 billion for FEMA, we came up with all of those billions to send weapons to other countries. So I'll end there and really appreciate you all being here tonight.